Hi, how's it going?
Excellent.
Good to see your face.
Wait.
Hey, nice to see you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Hey, Meredith.
Hey, Mary.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Excellent.
Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's a nice event, look like.
Thank you.
We give it a go. You know, it's one of those things you really miss the opportunity to see people you know and don't know in sort of an informal setting with a big topic and, you know, a couple of people who can answer some questions. And we thought we'd give it a go and see how it works.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're on the hour, so we'll get started. And you know, this is really meant to replace, you know, when we all went to industry meetings, there'd be the cocktail reception, either, you know, in the exhibit hall or, you know, everyone would meet up at the hotel bar afterwards and just, you know, network and chat, talk about anything. We haven't been able to do that for months. It doesn't look like we'll be able to do that for some time for the next foreseeable future. And so we wanted to create this forum to actually give us all an opportunity to just to talk and do that networking again. And so, you know, we started the series. The first, and you know, we put some thought into it. We just didn't want to have like an open, you know, just a wide open discussion. We thought maybe it makes sense to have a topic for each one. So we're playing around with that idea. This one, we're kind of forming it around imaging in clinical trials and the technology and tools around that. And then, you know, the next ones in the series have their own topics. But, you know, we also want to get everybody's feedback as part of the group in terms of what topics they'd like to, you know, talk about later on. And if you want to be a guest speaker. So Bill Lynch from Fujifilm is here with us for this one to talk, you know, kind of set the tone around imaging. But, you know, if you want to be a guest or have a good idea or recommendation for someone, then, you know, let us know. And, you know, we'll try and shape the way this works for the, you know, foreseeable or the upcoming meetings and kind of make it more of a collaborative effort. It's also, as you know, we wanted to have everybody's video if you can. You don't have to. And we also wanted everybody to be able to speak. So no one's muted. It's not just us talking all the time. So yeah, so that's kind of the format. We are going to, just so you know, because it's all public, if you have a private question you want to ask, I wouldn't ask it here. If it's any, you know, anything protected by IP. And we will be sharing this on our website, so that too will be available as well. So any questions from you guys about what we're doing and why?
And just to jump in, hi, it's Heather here. Chris and I work together. If anybody wants to stay on mute, doesn't want to use video, doesn't want to jump in and talk about anything, no pressure here at all.
Yep.
You can, Chris, I don't know if you wanted to take the slide down that you're sharing, because then it'll resize the screens for everybody a little bit better.
I will, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, just jump in at any point in time if you have any questions or anything like that, and we'll kind of keep it super informal.
Perfect. So let me get rid of this screen here. Stop share. There.
Oh, look,
Now we can
see everybody.
Now we can see everybody. So yeah, Bill, let's turn it over to you, and you know, just give us a little bit of background on the Fujifilm Synapse VNA and imaging in clinical trials, and then, you know, we can dive in and ask you some questions.
Great. Well, thanks everybody. I love this kind of, as Chris said, it would be better if we were all at a bar or sitting around a coffee table or something like that. But this is, you know, in these days and times is as close as we're going to get. But really appreciate the opportunity to sit with you all. And so I'm with the Terra Medica division of Fujifilm, and we are lucky enough to be partnering with TrialStat to bring what we call imaging liquidity to clinical trials and use of those images in post-trial use cases. So we've taken technology that was born and honed on the healthcare side, on the clinical side. It's called a vendor neutral archive. So essentially it's a software tool that allows you to take images and the associated metadata, and it can be any kind of image. It can be your traditional radiographic images, all the way to surgical videos, natural light photos, PDFs. To us, it really doesn't matter. So to take those images and the associated metadata and save them and have them accessible by downstream systems. In this case, our module is going to be part of the TrialStat platform. So it enables you to combine your clinical information with the images and have them all in one place so you can work with them and from your systems of choice. So it's the technology was actually first, it came out of the Mayo Clinic here in the United States, and it's been honed since then. And it's used on 6 continents. The software manages over 14 billion images a year. And when we were looking at other marketplaces that might have a need for this kind of technology, now one marketplace, just total aside, that I was very surprised about was bridges and other structures use imaging to detect cracks and weaknesses and things like that. Totally surprised me. I didn't know that ultrasound was used in those areas. But one of the areas we looked at, understandably, was pharma, biotech, given the amount and the importance of images. Now, we had thought, given the amount of money spent in pharma, that all of the systems in pharma would be very interoperable. And you hear TrialStat use that term interoperability a lot. We were surprised to find that most of the electronic systems tend to be proprietary or kind of all-in-one platforms. So for example, in imaging, an imaging core lab may pull the images in from the investigative sites, do the reads, but then if you want to work with those images or look at the images from an adjudication standpoint, et cetera, you have to work with the imaging CRO's tools. And then if you want to use the images, say, to create synthetic control groups or do some early phase modeling, the images typically can't be pulled out of those platforms, or if they can, they're typically in a format like a flat file or even a PDF that, you know, a researcher is going to look at that and say, well, that doesn't help me. I can't do anything with that data. So we kind of looked at that and said, well, what if in the course of doing a trial, you'd be able to do the read of the image from whatever reading system you want to do it from, and then those images were available for any other use cases, whether it's translational medicine, AI training algorithms, those kinds of things. And that's how we were lucky enough to cross paths with Chris and Heather at TrialStat, because they think the same way we do, which is all this very rich information shouldn't get stuck in a platform. It should be available anytime, anywhere from the systems of your choice. So you should be able to pull it together if you want to. You can pull certain images, combine it with clinical information that may have been pulled in the course of the trial. You can augment it with other images that you may have stored. So when we talk to a number of sponsors, the sponsors say to us, yeah, we figure we've got 20 to 30,000 images kind of scattered literally all around the world for various trials that we're running. And yeah, we'd love to bring them in, but we don't know how to do that. We were told that technology doesn't exist. So we've taken this technology from the healthcare side, and the technology is essentially, Chris mentioned a PACS system, but it's a technology that connects, on the hospital side, connects to all of the imaging systems, whether, it's, again, typical radiography or ultrasound or name it. It
Audio
really
files
doesn't
too.
matter. Yeah. And be able to store them in hierarchies that are easy to work with. So you can do a quick search by a metadata field. Let me see everybody in our database who have these kinds of images and are showing tumor volumes or lesion volumes of this. Quick search, you find them, you pull them up, and you work with them within your system, as opposed to having to go to your imaging CRO and say, well, here's what I'm looking for. And they say, well, it'll be 6 to 7 weeks, and we're not sure we can find everything. And you go, yeah, forget it. And that's not, I guess it is a little bit of a knock on the imaging CROs, but it's really not meant to be, because their systems are very good for what they do, but they were never built to be interoperable, to be able to share data
Exactly.
with
Yeah.
other systems.
Yep.
So that's what we're doing now with TrialStat, and it's pretty exciting. We have there is a biotech firm actually based in France that we'll be working with shortly, making an announcement about them. But it's a typical use case that we hear, where they say, we need the images, they are in this imaging CRO's platform, we want to get those as well as the images that are in these other 3 imaging CRO's platforms, move them over, combine them with our clinical data so we can do additional work. Because it's a shame. I mean, there's so many phenomenally brilliant people in this field who, if they have access to the data, can do incredible things. And you all have to spend more time looking for the data than you do working with it. It's just, it's maddening at times. So that's, we're trying to bring that message to the pharma space. This is one of those, the mediums, one of the forums that we're using to do that. So appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you, and happy to answer any questions you might have, talk about ideas, what can be done with images, what can't be done with images, those kinds of things.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, so we'll turn it over to everybody else. Do you guys have any specific questions you want to ask?
Wow, it's pretty exciting. So, by the way, my name's Kurt. Chris and I met last year. I actually work in the localization industry, the LSPs.
Okay.
And, yeah, and so, you bring up metadata, which is interesting. So that can be carried with the images. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Lives with that image. That's interesting, because then that's something where maybe that could be, again, data is just text, and text, any type, can be translated and can live within systems and aggregations. I'm just thinking like that would be something to maybe consider for companies that are maybe looking to invest in this kind of platform or these formats, and then thinking about, okay, where does this content live, and how could we maybe change it from English to Spanish and utilize that. Kurt. Yeah, I was thinking like that's something from it's interesting, like how could that work, because you're trying to it sounds like what you're saying, Bill, you're trying to, this software and this platform is trying to unify images and data access, which is what you really need. I think one thing I was curious about. So, in this system, are you using ultrasounds MRIs and CAT scans, you can just suck in and aggregate pre-existing scans, or is this something where your platform is creating like a unified, like a universal, like a higher, like a mezzanine file, like a universal file that can used within the system, but over different hospitals and healthcare providers? And clarify that maybe, is that you're creating like a unified master file that can be shared?
No, we give the client the ability to aggregate their images from any number of systems and archives. We have been, it's interesting you bring this up, Kurt, because we get asked, especially by a lot of the AI companies who are out there now, that, oh, we would, our client would love to license 1,000 MRIs with the, you know, these very specific criteria, but we don't own the images and we don't have license to you know, de-identify them and essentially monetize them.
Full disclosure, I'm one of those people that asked Bill if we could license those images.
Yeah. Oh, and I think it's a phenomenal idea, especially, you know, when you're training algorithms or, you know, running modeling, you typically need a lot of images. And most clinical trials are, you know, you may have a few thousand images, but it's not 10,000 or 100,000. So the client aggregates their images, but we're not creating a huge pool that the industry can use. That's doable. I mean, the software it scales very big, petabyte class, but it also works very small. So you can use it for 1,000 images if you wanted to. Or we have clients who on the healthcare side who have literally 5-6 billion images in their vendor neutral archive.
Yeah.
Wow.
And Bill, just sort of dovetailing off Kurt's question, if we're doing a global oncology trial where we're capturing imaging from sites across the world, chances are, you know, if it's a site in France, that the textual metadata that's part of those imaging is going to probably be in French. Have you ever come across a need to actually have that translated?
Oh yeah, I mean, so what we will typically do is, whether it's a foreign language or it's all in English, but depending on the system that it's coming from, that system may call field 18 one thing, another system may call field 18 something different. They both mean the same thing. So what we have to do is we come up with a crosswalk table to say, okay, you call it this, you call it this system calls it this, but in our system, it's going to be called this. So,
and that's non-destructive, right?
Exactly. Okay. So from a language standpoint, you can now expand that to say, okay, well, if it's coming from this system in France, it's going to be in French. So we need to have all of those metadata header fields in French translated over into English from, you know, the crosswalk table. So that's that normal, we call it normalization, but that normalization of the data is incredibly important, because when you're doing your searches, you want to be able to know that if I use this term, it's going to mean the same thing for across the search. I don't have to know French, or I don't have to know what this other system called it.
Right.
Excellent.
Meredith, do you mind if I ask you a question? So Meredith and I know each other, and Chris, Meredith, I'm not sure, I don't know that you know anybody else on the call, but we have worked on projects together. And just for everybody on the call that I don't know, my name's Heather Williams. So I head up our project management group at Carlstat, and Chris and I have known each other for probably going on close to 15 years or somewhere around that, which makes it old. and Meredith and I have known each other for quite a long time as well. And so I come from a operational standpoint as well as business development back in the day. And so you know, we've been working together. I've been in the industry since, I guess, you know, 2011 or so. But Meredith, I was curious to ask you, because as someone who is a clinical operations lead who has worked in a lot of companies that do drug device project, who has probably had to work in studies that have imaging, I was curious to know what kind of struggles you faced, and based on what we're kind of talking about, are there things that either you would say, oh, that's interesting, I didn't know we could do that, or challenges that you've had to have that we could about a little bit and what this looks like? Because I know you've jumped through every single hoop out there in some of the projects you've worked on.
I mean, the biggest challenge with images is, you know, the hospital firewalls, loading up the images, getting them from the hospitals. They're always going to have PHI in them, de-identifying them, making sure that they can be brought in. Then also, we've had image problems with the big, large files, getting them to, like, we had one EDC system where we tried to upload them and then get them de-identified, and the file size was so big, especially if they are OCTs. So those are the type of platform and issues that we have. Is one, how do you get the images from the sites? And if you get them from the sites, how do you make sure that they are compliant with all the other data, and also that they work, don't contain PHI.
Got
and
it.
that the header information in the visits match up with your EDC system.
Got it. Got it. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, something we've been talking about the, and it comes up, you know, since we started working with Bill and his team, is sort of this understanding of what else you would want to do with that imaging. Do you think that as somebody in a clinical group where you've worked on this and then those all get stashed away somewhere, is there, like, would you guys have value for something like that? Could you see how being able to access those images in the way we've been talking about would be helpful to
I
you?
mean, it depends on the quantity of images and what phases you're in. I mean, I can see definitely having it for a large global phase 3 program with hundreds of sites and making sure that you could do that, that there'd be value. In a smaller patient's phase 1, maybe less of it, and depends on your endpoint and how you're going to do with it, and how do you make it available to, like, is your endpoint being adjudicated? What do other people need to do with those images, and how are you going to analyze them, and how do you work with that platform and also get it to, there's a third-party vendor going to be involved in crunching the data or analyzing the images in that way. How can they access it the best way?
Do you think they give up? Do you think that sometimes you give up on some of the things you really wanted to do because it wasn't easy to do or cost effective?
Yeah, both.
And I don't mean you on the spot. I was just curious what you thought, because it's something that we hear a lot. And this is prior to even our relationship with Bill, but even, you know, in companies I've worked at, it comes up to, we'd love to do X, but we can't.
I mean, you know,
experience with that.
And I think, I mean, I've had studies where imaging was one of the endpoints, and it's just challenging to get the images. I mean, I've had so many CDs shipped in the day and age, and who knows how we're going to do it now with COVID. The files are so large and all that.
CDs. Well, thanks for letting me put you on the spot, Meredith, because it's funny you mentioned CDs. Just before everybody got on, we were talking about, Bill was sharing a little story about talking about, you know, someone who has had a stroke, and, you know, obviously they get imaging here and then they have to go somewhere else, and all the time the clock is ticking. Bill tells it much more elegantly than I do, but, you know, having to redo imaging because no one's sharing is actually a factor in life and death. So I was just curious to know your experience. So thanks.
No, I mean, yeah, trying to get it in the format, and also you want to collect it in one format, the core lab specifies it, but then it comes in a different format and you can't analyze it. So there's all challenges with images.
Meredith, there are some really good tools out there. There's a partner that we have, AG MedNet. I don't know if you've heard of them.
Yeah,
but they have some really good tools on that, on kind of the, we call it the first mile. So getting the images and the metadata from the investigative site. So they've got great tools for auto QC, de-identification, including pixelated PHI and PII.
Yep.
So you can go in and mask it and pull it right out. And we are always enamored of partners like TrialStat, who talk about automating workflow.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things that we think the pharma space is, they've been telling us that they're really looking for, because, most people tell stories like you do, Meredith, like, yeah, we use imaging, but, we have to do so much manual QC work before the reads are done. And then so-and-so does the read after 24 hours and they find out it didn't meet protocol. So we have to get the patient back and rescan them. So there are, working with TrialStat, our systems all have the ability to communicate with other systems and send messages and say, okay, this image is ready. Oh, yeah, this image is ready, but it's going to need manual intervention. It's how can we, on your behalf, take some of the mind-numbing steps, the process steps out of the way, so you can focus on working with the data. But I think when you look at the CROs and the imaging CROs, they're definitely listening, because they're all kind of looking at their platforms saying, how do we open our platforms up? If somebody may want to use their Hermes viewer to do nuclear med reads, as opposed to the viewer that comes with that proprietary platform. Or you may have people who do reads that are, in another country, and they want to use their viewer, not the included viewer. So there definitely are tools out there, and pretty cost-effective tools, to help streamline some of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, again, it depends. I mean, depending on the therapeutic area. Like my current trial that I work on, imaging isn't a big need of ours, but I've worked in therapeutic areas, and cancer for one of them, where and those images are the primary endpoints. So it's all about what do you like. Also, stroke or cerebral hemorrhages, the trials where imaging is key, paramount.
And part of this for us too is Meredith, you mentioned it's not that much of an issue for a small phase 1, but it is for a pivotal phase 3. One of the things that through these capabilities that we're creating is enabling possibilities. So if you've got 5 or 6 phase 1 trials that have been collecting imaging, what can you do with that imaging post those trials? What value can you derive from that imaging to shape the next phase 1? And by having these images easily accessible, or as Bill likes to say, liquid, it creates possibilities. And we ourselves don't know everything, but we do know technology. And by creating these interoperable systems, we have a vision for giving sponsors a platform where they can kind of blue sky and think about what they can actually do going forward with this data.
It's kind of like when we talk about when you're developing your CRF and you're planning everything and you're thinking about what data points are we collecting. You don't want to collect too much, but if you don't collect enough, you can never go back and get it. So the idea, which is
and something that TrialStat does really, really well is being able to link all the data together, including the images. So they'll pull in the metadata, link participant IDs and study IDs to other clinical information that's been pulled in. So you can easily look at your images in context with other clinical information that's been pulled. So maybe they're wearables, or any number of kind of virtual devices that are now being used in trials. You can combine that information as well. Literally, it's in less than seconds. The system does it for you.
That's cool. I mean, I'd love to see it one of these days. Sounds interesting.
Yeah, we're excited about it. Yan, on the regulatory side, in all your experience, have you come across any regulatory issues with working with images or anything like that?
Sorry, my internet is not that. I missed your question.
Yeah, no worries. I was asking from a regulatory side of things, are there any special considerations that you've come across when dealing with images?
Nothing special.
Nothing outside the traditional HIPAA, PIPEDA, GDPR type stuff?
Right.
Okay. And Nadia, you have a very special use case for your company. Did you have any questions around I would say not imaging, but acoustic files, because that's what drives the core of your platform?
First of all, it was very interesting to learn that it's actually a big problem and a gap that people cannot like attach the images when needed, and that the images are like cluttered everywhere. Because we actually recently just wrote like a simple database, like where you can upload the files with some metadata, so you could easily search anything you need in that. And we actually attaching the images because, so in general, I'll give a little overview. So because I guess it's only Chris who knows me out of this group. So we analyze the heart sounds and we create artificial intelligence, but we don't do it a regular way where people take the image and then analyze it. We use the original sound. So we convert it into TXT file, and actually that file can be converted back to the image. So when you upload it, it actually doesn't weigh anything because it's simple text with the numbers in it. And it gives you more data and more details than an actual image, because the image, it all depends on the quality and how it's been recorded, but the sound, when it's just converted to the numbers, it's that original file that we actually need. So, but attaching the images is important because at the same time, while analyzing the sound, we look at the previously done exams for ultrasound and AKG, for instance, because we need to make sure that that diagnosis was correct, because when we collect data from different sites, we need to be sure that that's exactly what they say it is, and our cardiologist goes through them, at least in the very beginning stage, like he checks all the data to make sure like they're all correct. And we definitely, like, it's really important to have these links between all the data, because at the same time, well, according to all the HIPAA compliance, we cannot track the patient, but we need to be able to track all the metadata, because you never know for which use case you're going to use that.
Exactly. Yeah.
For one condition, then for the next condition. And yeah, and like maybe another company would use the same data with images instead of using the sound. So yeah, that's all related.
That's very cool, Nadia. Yeah, keeping all of those things linked and being able to store them in, kind of hierarchies where they're easily found, and also you can limit access to certain kinds of information. It's not like everything gets put into one big, one big data store and people just go in and try to find what they're looking for. It needs to be done very meticulously. And so we work with both DICOM and non-DICOM files. And the challenge always with working with non-DICOM files is you want to always, well, even with DICOM files, but you always want to be able to store the images and the multimedia output in their native formats. Because sometimes, you'll see technology which will store the image, but they store it in a way that if you want to use that image again, it's wrapped in a strange way, or it's been converted and you can't really do anything with it. So our approach has always been to store everything in its native format, regardless of how it comes to us, because sometimes we'll get something from another system and that system may have wrapped the image in code to enable it to move through the connection a little easier. And so we have to kind of unwrap it. So to get back to the data, but like you said, you kind of don't want single use images. I mean, I guess it's okay, but when, in fact, we were just talking that we've been running some numbers with a couple of consultants, and the amount of money that's spent on pulling images, reading them and storing them is close to $1 billion a year.
Which is staggering.
And then so it's like buying a really, really, really cool, expensive car, driving it once around the block, sticking it in the garage and locking it, and then pulling the wheels off so nobody can ever drive it again. So if somebody comes to your house and says, do you have that car? Oh yeah, here, there it is. So it's kind of like the FDA coming to your house or coming to your business and saying, do you still have these files? Oh yeah, here they are. You can't do anything with them. And there's so much that can be done by the brilliant people in this field if only they had the ability to work with the images and the metadata in ways that work best for them in their systems of choice.
I love that analogy, Bill. That's amazing.
It's a very
That's
good one.
hilarious, and I will steal it, just so you know.
And actually, that's an eye-opening concept, because instead, while we're developing the cardiology project, we could actually sell this image storing application that we just created, you know, for just internal use.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I have to imagine that in your case, Nadia, all the physicians around the world must be sitting on mountains of the data that you'd like to get access to. I know you're looking for, KOLs to work with, but there's got to be a treasure trove of existing recordings out there that, with the right technology, you could get access to.
Yeah. A lot of them, they still, instead of having the sounds, they have the images. So
Right.
they ignore the sounds, they store this end resulting image, which is not always a good quality. And well, we don't use the images anyway, because it doesn't have all the information. But anyway, we're trying to find the people who actually have the original sounds besides the images. Images are critically important, but the sound is that original format and the information that has all that we need.
It's
Yeah.
so neat what you're doing, Nadia. Yeah, I mean, Chris has told me a little bit about it, but it's very cool.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. It's bright minds like your group that we're hoping to attract to our platform to take advantage of these technologies. And the other side of it.
Yeah, that's how we met with Chris.
Yeah, that's right. The other side of the technology is, going back to that idea of collecting images across multiple phase 1 studies. And Bill mentioned with AI and machine learning algorithms, you need a lot of data. So we're also looking at licensing other data sets to bring into the platform to then combine with sponsors' data sets to then have enough volume to actually do machine learning programs or AI programs. And the flip side is there too. If a sponsor is sitting on, a 500,000 images, to Bill's point, they have value, and with the right agreements, they could be then licensed for other purposes, right?
But I mean, I think you need to proactively talk to sponsors that are starting studies to add language to their consent to allow for this.
That's exactly right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Funny you brought that up. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, because you can't use unless the consents allow for it to be used, you're kind of violating the consent if the
So,
patient didn't agree
so
about to it.
talk to us more about that, because I know Nadia is working through this part of the process, and I'm not a clinical consultant, so I don't do it. I haven't had that preclinical or pre-study planning experience.
No, I mean, just saying,
right?
you're talking to people developing their consents at the same time that developing the database. If you provide certain language to them that is like template language that they can include in their master ICF, then you just say to the subject will consent that the data can be used in the identified fashion for these and these purposes in addition to the trial use.
But is it, because I confess I've actually not really looked at the consent forms that much myself. Are they generally written to be more open-ended?
No.
No, they're pretty
Pretty precise. They're very narrow. That's why you're saying you need to, you can write it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like a lot of times they'll say, oh, it can be used for whatever the sponsor's uses. But I mean, if you want to be able, if the sponsor wants to potentially license these very collected images of a very narrow subpopulation of the world that has that condition and could actually benefit from providing those images to other people, then they need to just make sure that they allow for that in the consent.
As far as I noticed, and what I've learned recently is the consent should have this like sentence that the data can be allowed for secondary use, and
Exactly,
the secondary
like
use can be like basically anything. You don't even need to specify that. So besides the main research that you're collecting it for, there's the secondary use paragraph that allows you to actually use the data after if it's anonymized.
But I would just come up with standard language that you tell your sponsors to include in their consents proactively,
Mm-hmm.
That's a
good point.
Good point, because what I was going to say earlier was just one of the questions that somebody else I was talking to who couldn't join us was talking about the idea of the planning and thinking. If you know you're starting a study that will be using images, you've never done it before, kind of thinking about the timelines and things like exactly what you said, Meredith. Think about your informed consent probably needs it. And that, and so for Bill, I was kind of, and also this goes to you, Chris, would be sort of in the planning process, if you're thinking about doing a study, is this a conversation you're having 6 months before you're expecting your first patient in, 3 months before? Who should, and the biggest thing that often comes up is who should be involved, because the decision-making process sometimes goes with the vendor selection team is sometimes not always the greatest group to really speak to this issue. And that creates a real issue that ends up costing money down the road when the decision making gets done, and then something has to be reversed. And this is not a great question because it's not directed in a way that could be clearly answered.
But I think you can come up with, I mean, you could come up with like a book, like a pamphlet or something like that saying, what is the purpose of your imaging? How are you going to use it? And if you answer yes or no to these situations, have you considered these aspects? And if that is the case, here are the steps you need to do in planning a trial,
Yeah, no, this is an awesome point. Yeah.
Yeah, and so if somebody came to TrialStat and to Terramedic and said, I've got a study coming up, it is in the future, and I want to make sure I do this right, what kind of timing, and I'm thinking about other people who might want to watch this afterwards as well, not just the person that I was speaking to, what does it take to implement something like this? What kind of notice do you need? What kind of planning is involved in this?
Well, most trials you start planning them 6 months before you start, right? You start selecting your vendors, you start finalizing your protocol. You might want to add language in that. So you need to, as you're approaching the vendors, you need to also select your central IRB, what policies you have, talk to some of the central IRBs and say, what language would you need in order for us to potentially use this imaging data in a broader fashion? What language do I need to include?
And for you, Bill, when you guys are setting everything up and working, for example, with us at TrialStat, if somebody said to you, how long is it going to take me to get this set up and working and great, and for you, Chris, as well, to make this, to execute on a plan like this?
On our end, where it still falls within our sort of 2 to 4 week study build time, and once the VNA is configured, then it's just a matter of enabling it for a particular study.
Yeah,
so it's fairly quick.
Yeah, and to augment what Chris was just saying, it's important to have that discussion early on, and then also talk through what does the workflow look like.
Mhm.
How many investigative sites? Once the images come in, what do you need done with them? Who's doing QC? And what do you want to do with those images? I mean, that should really be a standard question in any of these setups. What do you want to do with those images? Yes, these people are going to be doing the reads, and that's fine, but how do you want to use them post-trial? And that comes back to what Meredith was saying. Once you understand that, then you understand what language to slot into that consent form, because the dreaded consent form will bring you to your knees. It doesn't matter whether it's the pharma space, the healthcare space. If the proper consent isn't in place, and then, you know, as tough it is in the US, when you go to the EU and you're dealing with GDPR and you know, the specificity around the consent forms, including, I want to reserve the right to be forgotten. So if not only can you not use my data, I want to be pulled out, and you
Right.
expunge every last shred of data that shows I existed in your system. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of time to slot in that language, but if you don't do it up front, you have so many problems down the line that you just say, you know, forget it. We won't use that data beyond the trial itself. So it's in a mindset that you need to bring to the implementation approach, and a lot of that, I think, has to be pushed by the sponsor, because you know, a lot of times the imaging CRO, you know, they're thinking get it in, do the reads, and that's it. They're not thinking post-read.
No, of
The
course not.
sponsor's
Yeah.
thinking that. So the sponsor, it kind of has to take the initiative to say to the imaging CRO, look, we plan to use these images post-trial. So, you know, make sure that's in the consent forms.
You guys calculated out how much each image costs them, like for typical image modalities, so that the sponsor can sort of feel like, similar to that $1 billion analysis you'd said, but per image, you know.
Meredith, I was on a call at about 5:30 talking about that same thing, because they said, okay, well, if we know the estimate is that, you know, the total cost of imaging related to clinical trial studies is about $1 billion a year, divide that by the number of images, and then you can come up with a rough cost of, okay, here's how much it really costs to derive that image. And it is going to be a lot higher than most people think when you actually enter in, you know, all the costs that go, you know, just like you were saying, all the manual work that has to be done if you don't have the right tools up front to do the auto QC work and the de-identification and the crosswalking,
The mapping,
metadata tables.
Yeah, that it's got to be a high number, really high.
But we're working on that.
I think that might be helpful data if you break it down by modality, like, you know, an MRI versus an OCT versus a PET.
That's a great idea.
I
Yeah,
feel
that's a
I
really
feel
great
a white paper coming out.
It is a great idea. Just
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. No, that would be interesting. I think that there's lots of folks that would like to get their fingers in that. It'd be a great conversation. We're not going to repeat imaging again the next time we do this, but we might have to get a smaller group together to talk about it a little bit more.
Oh, absolutely. And Meredith, it's just because I know you've worked on quite a few different clinical trials. Generally speaking, are sponsors trying to move towards having more open-ended consent forms, where even with the clinical data, they're getting consent to potentially reuse that data for other purposes?
Well, the clinical data is kind of nondescript. It's the specimens and the images, right, that are concerned, you know. So I think they want to be able to use all the lab specimens they can use beyond the like I've seen
Blood draws and all that
studies.
stuff. Yeah. Okay.
They had language in there that said that we can use it for other purposes, you know, including commercialization, blah, blah, blah. You will not profit from this purposes. And they specifically exclude genetic testing just to kind of comfort the poor subjects, but they're very specific that they can broaden the use of it so that they are allowed to do that.
Okay, so it's not a foreign concept then to the sponsors. Okay. Yeah, because you know, I like using the phrase, we don't want to paint ourselves into a corner. And you know, it from our perspective, it always makes sense to plan your trial up front such that you're not painting yourself into a corner, so that when you do have that aha moment 6 months into the trial, you don't have to go back and try and reconsent, you know, half the patient population in the study.
Yeah, not just in a corner. You don't want to paint yourself out of compliance either. You know, you don't want to violate their HIPAA.
Also that.
Yeah, that's useful.
Any other questions? So the other aspect to this is, you know, we're also open to everyone asking each other questions. So if we've exhausted the whole imaging piece, does anyone want to ask any questions of anyone else on the call?
Good.
And one of the things that we talked about as well was, you know, and this is sort of in the planning and the process of getting people together. I mean, there's obviously connections between everybody here, so this is a little bit different than a bigger type of call where there might not be. But whether or not people want to be able to provide an email address or have a little bit of a mailing list or have a LinkedIn group or things like that. So not necessarily now if you're not comfortable while we're talking right now, but after this, when we're done, you know, I think most people are connected to Chris and a few of you to me. Let us know, because, you know, there might be some sort of offline group to this that we might put together that might be able to help us all just stay in touch. And that way, if we do think of something and we know that we've got a great resource that we've met on here that we want to, you know, tap with a question about something, that we can kind of create that little bit of a community. So any advice or ideas or things that you guys have about that sort of thing, I think after this we'll follow up with everybody and ask some questions, but we'd love to hear about that, because it'd be really kind of create that sort of community around this open exchange of information and best practices and great ideas that you might not have thought about.
Yeah, we need like T-shirts that say "Free your data" or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you going to print us some, Bill? That's sweet.
Yeah.
All right.
But
I'm taking notes.
When we get to say, you know, like 50 people in the group for one of these meetings in a month or something, we'll have a bonus prize of, you know, 10 people get the mugs that say you know, I'm an Ask Us Anything participant. We'll figure it out, but no.
Yeah, we need some good swag. No,
all right, work on the swag for Meredith. No problem.
Right.
I'm just teasing.
But and actually, Chris and I hadn't even talked about this yet. But one of the things I was thinking of was potentially a LinkedIn group. My head keeps slipping into my forest. I'm sorry about that. But you know, just have a LinkedIn group if anybody wanted to join up and connect there. That it's a nice kind of way to bridge that, you know, casual here to that business environment and be able to, you know, invite folks in and exchange some questions. Yeah, and
normally if we were meeting in person, we'd be exchanging business cards. At least I know I'd be handing mine out. So afterwards, you know, we're kind of learning this as we go. But after the meeting, if you do want to share your contact info with everyone else, just let Heather and I know, and we can we can do the introductions. Yeah. Any suggestions? Like, what are your thoughts? What did you think of the meeting? Do you like it? Do you want to do more of them?
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. It's lots of, you know, things to learn, things to like share, and it's a casual, not that formal, and you know, it's very good.
Yeah, when we wanted to aim for informal. Again, you know, like, 'cause even like Jan, you and I met at the Life Sciences Ontario evening networking meeting that we cannot go to right now. And it's a totally casual environment. It's hosted here in Toronto at a restaurant called the Marché, and it's a giant market, restaurant, market, and bar. And when you go in, you actually get a card, like it's not a credit card, but it's a card. And when you order a drink, you just swipe it, and then at the end of the day, you pay. So so you can just wander around the place. So it's completely
really cool. It has,
casual.
like, little restaurants and a bar area and everything, so you can get all
Oh,
sorts
is it like Mövenpick? I've seen that. Yeah.
It's like a Mövenpick, yeah.
of the
Yeah, Mövenpick thing. Okay.
Yeah. We can't do this stuff. Bill, last time we met in person, I think was in Orlando outside at a tiki hut.
Oh, that's right. In Universal.
Yeah,
It was.
yeah, exactly.
Universal, which it would be a terrible place to be right
Yeah,
now.
which
We're
is
not
now
going there
where,
now.
isn't that where the NBA is, all its players locked down, either there or Disney, and, you know.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
you go.
Yeah.
Well, Meredith and I met at DIA, so we met at a conference too.
Okay.
That's many, many, many years ago.
Many moons ago. 2011. It was 2011.
Nadia, you and I met in of all
Right.
places in Montreal.
Right before COVID hit. Right.
Yeah, January, I think.
Like a week before.
Yeah.
Chris,
Before
I
we could
noticed
still
many
travel,
of these
yeah.
meetings seem to happen around bars. Now, is that just coincidence?
I'll take
with
full
you,
credit
or
for
is it
that.
where you hang out?
That's where he hangs
Probably
out.
my fault.
No, I've seen Chris in non-bar settings.
Have you? Okay, good.
Libraries, right, Meredith? And
Definitely.
yeah.
You know, Library of Congress all the time. No.
Right. And Kurt, we met in California. I was at a meeting and you popped in because we were
Right.
local. I
Yeah,
can't
that was
remember
in
where it
Santa Monica. That was in December. Yeah,
Okay.
that was when we met in the lobby of a bar. Not quite the bar, the lobby.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a quick meeting. We talked about languages and some projects, but it was great meeting you. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. So for this first one, because we didn't know how the format was going to go, we purposely kept the group small. We're thinking we're still going to cap it at 20. But if you know of anyone that you think would be interested in joining, by all means, send them, to the meetup.com page and have, let them know they can register and join us for next week. So next month, we're going to open it up and invite even more people. So yeah, hopefully we'll see you there on the next one.
Okay,
And
thank you for arranging
Thank
this.
Thank you very much.
You're
Chris,
welcome.
for arranging it.
Thanks for coming, Bill. I appreciate you joining us as our expert on the meeting. It was great.
Yeah,
I love
absolutely.
this, and if I can send you all away with anything, it's that don't let anyone tell you you can't work with your data, whatever kind of data it is, the way you want to work with it.
Perfect.
That's the technology exists. The people you may be working with may not have that technology, but there's companies like TrialStat who can basically work with any system. They've got the interoperability capabilities in their platform to be able to get data out of systems and make it available to other systems and work with it in whatever system you want to, including TrialStat. So don't take no for an answer.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you, everyone else, too. This was great.
It was so nice to meet
It
It was
everybody.
great seeing everybody.
Have a good
Thank you
night,
very
much.
everybody.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
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 Bye.